Hi guys, I've got someone I tracked down that I was reading some articles, doing my own research on how to train, fuel, and perform the best for endurance athletes, and specifically the female athlete. And I came across Linia, and you are in Rome. Where are you
I'm in
based?
Milan.
Milan. My one of my favorite places is Italy. We've gone to Italy many times, and I'm in North San Diego, and we are going to just dive into some research. You've been specializing in more female athletes. So talk about your what you do and your why and what's your drive. I was like to know what's people's purpose and mission.
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me on this pod, Debbie. So I'll just talk a little bit about myself. So I am a dietitian, a sports nutritionist, and I've been in this practice for 15 or so years. And when I first started, I was working as a performance nutritionist, and that basically means that I was working with elite athletes. And as part of a multidisciplinary team, we had an athlete in front of us, and we would try to understand as much about the athlete, how they kind of operated on a biological level, so we could put strategies in place so that they could run faster, score more goals, and be a better form of them. And very early on in my career, what I realized was some of the strategies, particularly linking with fat loss, that I would apply to my male athletes wouldn't work quite the same as with my female athletes. So it made me, as a keen young dietitian, wanting to really learn and wanting to put strategies that were working for my athletes, start going back and looking at the literature and seeing what the recommendations were. And the first thing I realized is, there is actually not much recommendations that are female specific. And when I then went back to the scientific literature to look at that, there wasn't much in there about research that's been done in specific female populations. And so, I kind of in the early on in my practice started just trying to try about trial and error, seeing how from client to client things worked and evolved. Now, the good news is in the last probably 5 or so years, there's been the realization that there's a sex data gap. And with that realization is us as clinicians, researchers, realizing that actually a way that we've been recommending female athletes to fuel, like our male counterparts, is not necessarily the best way. And we need to do much more research, specifically looking at females. And actually, that book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, that's true. And yes, we communicate differently. Yes, we have different ways of kind of doing things on an emotional level, but also nutritional needs actually vary. So what's really exciting is actually what I saw very early on in my own clinical practice is now the science and the research is catching up to it. And we're now actually finding out that women and men need to fuel differently. Now, perhaps I see it more because I have been working with high performance athletes who we're constantly trying to give them cutting edge things. But this also applies to, people who are not elite athletes, who are just trying to lose weight or be active and be the best version of themselves. So what I'm really passionate about is exactly that, is helping people become the best versions of themselves. So a super you, basically, whether or not that is you're an elite athlete or you're trying to do endurance sport, or whether you're just a new mum trying to just juggle work and mum life.
I love that because I always say the same thing. I just want you should do your training, feeling, perform your best in life so you can be the best version of yourself. And so you can show up every day and
Exactly.
thrive and not try to survive the day. And when I continue to talk about every show, everyone's going to get sick of me, but it's so important to do what you're doing now to train for your future self, as I'm 51 somehow now. And even though I think I'm 35, I still wear
You look
pigtails.
it.
But my dad just sadly passed away last 6 months ago, and now
Oh,
it's
sorry to hear
like,
that.
okay, but it gives me a picture. My mom, everyone's in their 80s that they hang out with. You really, if your parents are aging, look at how your parents are doing. Look how they move. Do they have the strength to get up and down? My mom's like, I was just with her yesterday. She could put her hand around her thigh. I'm like, that's not a good thing. We need muscles, we need strength. And so how you want to show up to life today, but how do you want to show up to life when you're your parents' age or when you're 80, 90 years old, so you can still do things. And I think it's so important you don't break yourself down now as an athlete, because we push ourselves hard and people are that driven, ambitious, high performing athlete that they they train all the time, but it's like, is that really beneficial for you? Are you doing more harm than good? And then, the nutrition thing is what I came to you for, because I think I'm on a mission to help clear up the information out there, because fasting is gone, really confusing people, because what if you're training every day? How do you fast? And then carbs, zero carbs, carnivore, keto, it's
Yeah,
confusing out there. So I just say eat real
totally.
food that balances your nutrition out. But there's
Not
people
a bad
still
place to
that,
begin.
yeah, this is like what to eat. And then athletes want to burn fat and how to do that. But and then I watch people training too hard and then not recovering. So let's kind of dive into what we talked about, kind of our list here of what's the biggest mistake women make when it comes to nutrition versus men, because a lot of my listeners are male. So we want to talk about, okay, what can men do and women shouldn't do? Maybe look at it that way. It's like men do this
Yeah,
and that
yeah.
works, but women can't.
Yeah, well, I mean, fantastic questions. And as you say, we've got so much to unpack. I think the biggest mistake that I find that women make when it comes to nutrition is basically following the same guidelines as men. When in terms of dieting, in terms of fueling, in terms of recovery, actually, we've got to find some female specific nutrition advice. And then if we then say, okay, well, what should women be doing? Okay, I think the first thing for me is that women need to eat enough. And I think what's fascinating is I saw a study the other day when I was writing another article, and the study showed that this is with elite athletes. So they're looking at a group of professional football players. 88% of them fell short of eating enough to match their energy requirements in comparison to their male counterparts. And I see that in clinical practice as well. And that's not just me seeing it in clinical practice. We know that even just recreational exercises, at least 45% of them fall into what we call a subclinical classification of low energy availability. Now, basically, low energy availability is you're not putting in enough fuel for your body to look after the general day-to-day stuff to keep it ticking and to support that, the function of exercise. And think about what happens when your phone runs out of battery. This happens to me all the time because I'm never really organized with charging my phone at the right time. Is when my phone runs out of battery, it kind of goes into energy save mode. The light is dimmed, the apps basically don't refresh, everything's a little bit slower. Exactly what happens to us, particularly female athletes, when we don't fuel ourselves enough, is our body signals the fact that we're not eating enough to us being in a stressful situation. So it starts slowing down. So it kind of says, okay, well, Linia is going to be going out for a run. So I am going to save that energy for that run, but I'm going to switch off things that I think are maybe not as vital. It wouldn't be really useful if she got pregnant right now and had to carry a baby. So I'm going to down-regulate her hormones. And as a result of that, I would perhaps start missing my cycles. And what I see a lot in clinic is girls in their early 20s who are just running, trying to run a marathon, trying to do their first triathlon, not fueling enough, coming to see me because the doctors referred them for a stress fracture, purely because they didn't fuel enough. And what the research shows is that it can take up to 4 days of underfueling for that down regulation to already happen. And the difference between men and women, and men, I promise I'm going to come to you and give you some advice as well. But I think what I find fascinating is that women have a lower threshold. And because this sounds a little bit unfair, but innately what drives the female physiology is her ability to reproduce. We are creatures of evolution. So our body is always wanting to kind of know that I can get pregnant, be healthy enough and have the nutrients and resources to carry a baby to term. And so if it perceives that my environment is not conducive to that, it just starts switching off. Because obviously men are involved in reproduction, but don't have to get into the nitties and gritties, is they basically expend the energy that could be, it's quite short term, it's a teaspoon's worth, and then that's it. Whereas we get pregnant, we carry a baby for 9 months, and we give birth, we breastfeed, etc. And so the reproductive energy required for women is much more, and therefore that's why our physiology is tipped to preserving our energy for that. So women are not eating enough, and men can get away with that before they start breaking down. This doesn't mean that I don't see men who go into low energy availability. I see this in clinic, and particularly because we're living very, very stressful lives. And so I see, for example, what would happen is in a woman, low estrogen means eventually menstrual cycle. In a man, I'll see low testosterone. So low libido, low testosterone, not able to gain muscle mass as much. So you do get low energy availability eventually. It takes a little bit longer for males, but we still do see it as well. So not eating enough, a big one for me, not eating enough before exercise, followed up with not eating quickly enough after exercise, because very often women are wanting to maximize a fat burning window. And so there again, it goes back into fueling. How we're fueling before and how we're fueling after.
Yeah, but go into that a little more. Do you have guidelines for men and for women to eat? Because that's the biggest thing we've talked about all year, all last year on this podcast is fasted exercise. Like if I go work out 5:30 in the morning, do I need to eat to improve performance, but I'm not hungry, I don't want to eat, but then afterwards, when is it important to eat before? When is it important to eat something during as amino acids, maybe a gel, and then post-workout, if women need to eat, I hear more like Dr. Stacey Sims talks about, women need more something
in the window of
30 minutes or so, but men can wait 3 hours, right?
Okay,
so
Debbie,
anything on that would be great.
Totally. Let's break this down because it does seem to get complicated, but if you try and understand the different phases, it's easier to break down. Okay, so let's talk about eating before exercise, and that kind of goes to fasting exercise or not. Okay, so let's talk about fasting exercise. So the benefits of fasting exercise is basically that you allow your body to use your short-term carbohydrate store, which is called glycogen. And, we cannot store in lots of glycogen. So if your body taps into that and then runs out of it, it's more likely to then tap into your fat stores, which is a good thing in terms of fat loss, but also could be a good thing for endurance athletes, because otherwise, if you become more adapted to using fat as an energy source, you then rely less on carbohydrate gels and drinks and things like that, which when you're doing endurance sports, sometimes actually taking in too much is a faff, and also some people just don't agree with it as well. Okay, so there is an element of us wanting to become more fat adapted, but what tends to happen is now the difference between men and women is that men do well with it. Okay, so a man waking up, going to having a coffee, because having a coffee, caffeine basically increases the mobilization of those fats so that they can be used as energy. And then they can go and exercise. But usually that works better for like longer training sessions where perhaps you're not doing high intensity stuff. But women, sometimes they could do that if they had a good meal before, because it goes back to the fact that the research shows that women perform best in fueled states, because if their body starts realizing that they're not getting fuel on board, we tap into our muscle mass quicker than men do. So actually what can happen is that a woman can start using her precious muscle mass as an energy source for the session that she's doing, which no woman would want to do that, because as an endurance athlete, we're wanting to maximize that power to weight ratio. But I totally get it. I'm a wannabe triathlete myself. And when you're doing an early morning session, like really, am I going to be waking up an hour earlier to try get breakfast in? It's not going to work. So what women can do is perhaps maximize the meal they have in the evening. So it could be a balanced meal that contains some carbohydrates, some protein, and some vegetables. So it could be something like some chicken, some sweet potato, and some vegetables. I mean, that's very cliche. Or it could be, I'm in Italy, pasta, bolognese, and like a side salad, okay? If I've got that fuel on board, I've already topped up my glycogen stores. So actually, it means that maybe in the morning, I might just have to take a shot of kefir. That's what I do. So a little shot of kefir and off I go. It's easy to digest. It gives me that branched chain amino acids, which are important to protect my muscle mass when I'm doing my exercise. Okay, so I think if you have the opportunity to eat, women, so a nice healthy breakfast, that could be, some porridge or oatmeal, if I'm talking American lingo, or it could be, some toast or bread with peanut butter and jam or peanut butter and jelly before you go. But if you find that you've got a slower digestive system and you can't cope with that, then actually do like I do and just take a shot of kefir and off you go. But Debbie, I'm going to come back to males, because what I love about nutrition and sports nutrition is that one size doesn't fit all ever. And even if the literature and the health advice now is more tailored to men, if a man has not slept the night before and he's super stressed with a work deadload, should he be fasting? Should he be training fasted? No, because if he does that, he's more likely already to have higher amounts of the circulating stress hormones. And actually, he's not going to get the physiological responses to that training session. So he will also do better if he has a snack pre-exercise. So I would say train fasted if you're a male, because your physiology kind of works best for you in that aspect. But think about whether you're stressed, whether you've had enough sleep, and what type of session you're doing. So you should never always use the same type of training program. You should never always use the same type of nutrition ahead of exercising. I would say be really mindful of, aware of everything else that's going on, so you can get the desired adaptations to that training response. A very long-winded answer, Debbie, but I hope I've made it practical and easy enough for you to understand.
Yeah, no, I love that because, well, I talk about what I call the holistic method. That's 8 elements to transform an athlete from the inside out, using nutrition, exercise, sleep, stress management, movement throughout the day, digestion, gut health, hydration, mineral balance, and then happiness, gratitude, play, laughter, and that 8th one.
Love it.
And I think, I try to coach people with all those elements need to be paid attention, focusing one area at a time, then, getting it all together with functional lab testing and genetics. And I think it's so important to realize chronic stress is why my listeners know my story. I wrote a book, Life is Not a Race, It is a Journey, because 10 years ago, my life changed forever because of my adrenal exhaustion. And I was a high performing athlete. And my mission now is to help people avoid going through what I did and how I've never been able to be the same again, because I broke down my body so much at a cellular level, and fasting too much and not eating enough. And we get fearful of eating any carbohydrates. We get into this being fat adapted to burn fat, be metabolic efficient. I'm not going to eat anything. I cannot eat for a 3-hour bike ride, 4-hour bike ride, but is that harming my body? I can do it. And then people brag, oh yeah, I did a 5-hour ride and just had salt and water. But is that causing you more stress? Right. And then if it's running, like I had ran my own fitness studio for 10 years, had huge financial stress, running the business stress and training clients, coaching, blah, 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 whatever it is, we get this accumulation of so many different sources of stress externally. And then we get these as an athlete, we get so many hidden internal chronic stressors, because probably all of it together, but just how we break down our immune system and gut health and just the whole domino effect of internal problems. So I think athletes really need to be smart, and being fit and healthy I'm rambling, getting on my box, but I think it's important to look at when to eat or not to eat. But it's so psychological now, and just I think we get brainwashed and confused how to be, people get into keto adapted, fat adapted, fasted exercise, performance, but I'm getting a lot of clients coming that kind of experience what I did, that I was doing too much of everything. And I call it the Goldilocks effect, not too little, not too right. What's right for you, the individual, is going to be so different.
Yeah, and I would say for gentlemen, for example, so we know metabolically you guys do well with intermittent fasting in comparison to women who are still in their reproductive years. So menopausal, postmenopausal women seem to do better with intermittent fasting. But what I would say is, even with my male clients, some who I am trying to fat adapt and get them to do intermittent fasting, they just don't feel well with it. It just doesn't work with them. So that is in itself feedback to say, well, that eating pattern isn't for you. So it comes back to the fact that one size never fits all. So even if we can kind of say, moving a step further, we know we need to give women specific nutrition advice, and men need to have specific nutrition advice. But even within those boxes, there needs to be that individualization, which comes back to the awareness of saying, try it. How do you feel? Feedback. Take into consideration all the different pillars, like you're saying as well, which is really important. And I just want to pick up on one of the points that you made earlier. What's fascinating is the body actually can't decipher whether something is a physiological stress or a psychological stress. And I love that, because, it's the same about, okay, well, you have a resource bucket. So how are you filling that resource bucket? filling that resource bucket from a nutrition point of view, obviously nutrition is my jam, that's what I talk about, might mean you eating before you exercise. If you're not able to eat before you exercise, because I get it, life happens, we're busy, you're dropping the kids off and perhaps you don't have time to eat, but then be really proactive with getting that recovery nutrition in. As you're saying, Dr. Stacey Sim talks about this window of opportunity after we exercise. Women have a shorter window of opportunity. They need to get in there 30 to 45 minutes after the exercise. Men, their window of opportunity after exercise is up to 3 hours. So, ladies, if you can't eat before, make sure you recover aggressively and make sure that recovery is a combination. You get in the protein in there because we tend to become more catabolic than men because our bodies in our livers process protein a little bit differently. So make sure that your recovery has at least 20 to 25 grams of protein. Are and intensity in your training, you might need to add some carbohydrates with that as well. And then make sure also that if you need to fuel during exercise, we haven't talked about that, you're doing that. So when do you need, the question is, I suppose we should talk about now, is when do you need to fuel during exercise? So again, it comes back to what is your goal in this exercise session? So you're following a program, you're working with a coach. What is the goal? And if it is about sports performance, we know that your body performs best when it knows some carbohydrate is coming on board. And I love this study where they were basically looking at a group of cyclists. And they were doing some imaging in the brains of cyclists. And when the cyclists, even if they were just taking a swig of a isotonic carbohydrate drink, and then they were still spitting it out, they weren't even swallowing it. When the body, the receptors in the mouth just kind of thought the carbohydrate was coming up, the reward centers in the brain lit up, and they actually were able to do a higher, revolutions per minute. They were actually able to push in more power just because the body knew the carbs were coming on board. So the recommendations in terms of carbohydrates during exercise is if you are doing exercise that is longer than an hour or 75 minutes, then you do need to start thinking about during exercise nutrition. Now, let's talk about carbohydrates first, and I'll talk about branched chain amino acids. So carbohydrate, that means, again, the range is huge, 25 grams per hour to up to 90. So you need to find, again, what is your sweet spot? What is your spot where you're getting enough carbs to feel that you've got enough energy before you start feeling like your gut is uncomfortable and it's too much and you end up having adverse effects like nausea or diarrhea? So find your sweet spot, and that's individual. And some people like gels and drinks. Some people, there's a move more towards natural food in inverted commas during exercise as well. And then, we bring the branched chain amino acids in because they're thought to be amino acids that basically help prevent the breakdown of our muscles. But Debbie, I must say, if somebody's overall diet contains enough protein, if they're eating enough energy, if they're eating enough pre-exercise and recovering quickly, then actually there's no big need to then add additional branched chain amino acids into the pre or the during exercise session. Branched chain amino acids seem to be more effective, perhaps, in addition to all the things I've been talking about in your diet, when you have an older athlete who's over 50, because we know that actually with age, again, we have the sarcopenia and the muscle losses there. So I would say, again, it depends on what your overall diet needs to look like. Branched chain amino acids are not a magic bullet, but in context of a healthy, balanced diet, they could perhaps work for you.
Great tips. So what about going back to carbs? Because I think what I try to clarify is what are carbohydrates, because in our North America, find wheat is inflammatory for most people, gluten. Compared to going to Europe, you can eat all you want. Yeah, I swear
good
you're
quality
fine.
carbs here. Yeah.
So we call it nature's carbs, or getting more berries? Because what are your thoughts on eating plants, the plant toxins, having too much of that is stressful, anti-nutrients versus just having some fresh berries and a proteins with whey protein in a smoothie? What are some suggestions you find that works for people for having carbohydrates? Because instead of having a bagel or bread, and people can't do that, what are some other things that you find work great for people? Sweet potatoes.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a complicated answer. And I
They
wish
all
we could
are,
do,
right?
they all are, and I wish we could do a whole podcast on carbs, but let me just break it down a little bit. So, in terms of carbohydrates, we have different groups of carbohydrates. Okay, so one type of carbohydrate is fiber, and basically, what a carbohydrate is are sugar molecules bound together in varying degrees. So fiber is bound together so tightly that us humans cannot fully digest it. You need to have 4 stomachs, like a cow or a goat, to fully digest fiber so you can extract all the glucose from it. So that's a good food for us to eat, because fiber tends to come from plant-based foods like fruits and vegetables and whole grains, okay? Very nutritious foods with lots of different vitamins and minerals. And if we can't digest it fully, we're going to need to eat more fibrous foods. Okay, so you get fibrous carbohydrate, but then you also get what we call starchy carbohydrate. And starchy carbohydrates are bound together not as tightly as fiber. So us humans can fully digest the molecules in between, and so we can extract all the energy that we need. And so that examples of starchy carbohydrates would be your bread, would be your pasta, would be your rice, or I'm trying to think of any other examples, rice, crackers, etc. Okay, cereals. Now, within that group with starchy carbohydrate, I would always say that you need to always start with the more whole it is, the more nutritious it's going to be. The less machines it's gone through, the more it looks like how it kind of grows, probably the better it's going to be also for you. So it's not going to be super ultra processed. So absolutely, we know that particularly in the States and in the UK, there's a rise in gluten intolerance, which is linked to the fact that farming practices are slightly different. I mean, as I said, I live in Italy. And can I tell you that when I eat a bowl of pasta here, do I bloat? No, because the quality of the pasta is and the way that it's grown means that there's less gluten actually released. Okay. So I would tend to say that whole starchy carbohydrates like your tubers, so that could be your sweet potato, your new baby potatoes with the skin keeps a fiber in there, your parsnips or your root vegetables as well would also be a good source. Ancient grains are another one, and they're gluten-free as well, so that would be your quinoa, red rice, brown rice, black rice, for example, other things like farro or spelt, so ancient grains tend to be good. Maize as well is another ancient grain that's good. So people can include those starchy carbohydrates within their diet and as part of their main meals, and they should still be fine. Then we go to, obviously, so starchy carbohydrate, it gives you more energy. You need to include them in your diet, but based on how intense your energy, how intense your workouts actually are. So that one's variable in terms of portion sizes, and you need to kind of balance those out. Whereas things like fruit and vegetables, for me, I'll count those as fibrous carbohydrate. But even within fruit and vegetables, I mean, we can say tropical fruit or temperate fruit, which ones have more glucose, which ones have more fructose. It can get more complicated. But I would just say, in general, what we know in the States and in the UK is that we're not eating enough fiber. So am I going to become really pedantic about whether or not you should be eating a banana or berries? I think the general message for most people is you need to get more fiber on your plate, because we know that our gut bacteria, when we start looking at people in the States or in the UK, shows that we're not eating enough fiber. So get more vegetables and fruit. I wouldn't be too pedantic yet about the types. I think if somebody's got enough fiber in, then we start looking at quality. So then we start breaking down and saying, okay, berries, temperate fruit might be better than tropical fruit, just in terms of carbohydrate, in terms of, whether you're getting in glucose or fructose. And then you go a step further, it could be organic because it's got less pesticides and things like that. But I think in general, and I was saying this to a client earlier, is already, I think when we're endurance athletes, and I know myself because I'm a triathlete, we've got a predisposition to want to be perfectionists in certain things. And you know what? You can eat the most perfect diet, which doesn't even exist. And if that becomes a stress for you, then you're undoing some of that work. So for me, I would say get the fundamental building blocks there. Look at your eating patterns. Are you eating at the right time? Are you eating enough? Do you get enough protein at the right time? Are you getting quality complex carbohydrates in? Are you getting enough fruit and vegetables in? Then let's look at the quality of that. Is it organic? Where does it come from? Is it then, so I move down that journey with a client. I think sometimes we become so focused on getting one particular protein powder that has not an emulsifier in it, but actually the rest of our diet is not good and we're not hydrating. Then, what's the point of that?
There we go. So I think it's to kind of wrap that part up is matching your fueling with your intensity. So if you are doing a lower heart rate, maffetone, max aerobic function heart rate, zone 1, zone 2 workout, that you're burning primarily fat as your main fuel source, carbs are your backup fuel tank. Should we eat beforehand? So if I eat dinner, say 3 hours before bed, I stop eating. I had a meal that's good balanced meal, and then I wake up, I can work out and then have some protein with some carbs in it after workout for women right afterwards, men a little longer. But if you're doing more of a higher intensity speed workout that's high heart rate, low heart rate, that you're actually doing intervals, because I think a lot of people don't. They do the black hole training, not high, low, that then we might need to have more carb timing. So do you agree with that? Like the strategic carb timing, but are carbs necessary when you're burning fat? So I think it's, people, like you said, need to change how we eat, change how we train, and women even more week to week based on your hormone cycle, but matching that fueling, when is it appropriate to add in a little bit more carbs and when you don't really need them because we just burn fat?
And I would say, again, it comes back to, what do you want to get out of this exercise session?
Yeah,
where are you in? Yeah, what's the purpose?
Yeah.
And where are you in your training program? So if your training program is periodized and you're doing specific things, is because if it's all about performance, we know that we're going to need carbs. If you're doing 2 sessions a day, recover aggressively and provide your body with that fuel, whether you're male, and more so if you're female. But perhaps if recovery isn't such a big thing and you've got a big gap between your exercise sessions, and it's more about trying to fat adapt versus trying to get maximum adaptations and getting that heart rate up and things like that, then perhaps you might go lower on carbohydrates. And I think what's interesting is with the menstrual cycle, like you completely said, is women also have to adjust based on their menstrual cycle. So very simply, we have 2 phases of our menstrual cycle. We have one phase that is the high hormone phase, okay, the luteal, and one that is a slightly lower hormone phase. And it seems to be that in the high hormone phase, we are more catabolic. So we need to include more carbohydrates then. But in the lower hormone phase, we are anabolic. We build better. So we could get away with having less carbohydrates in our diet then. So I think what we need to start doing is saying, okay, how can I make my physiology work for me? But that doesn't mean I'm always going to be following the same eating pattern all the time. This is what I'm trying to say to you, is that it's always back to the awareness is, okay, where am I at in my cycle if I'm a woman? Or how did I sleep? Because it could be, again, what else is going around? I've got so many deadlines. I'm super stressed. I've got relational stress. I've got work stress. So should I be going low carb? Absolutely not. Because even your immune system is going to start shouting at you and you're going to start getting run down.
So I think I can hear people saying, well, carbs are not necessary. There's essential amino acids, there's essential fatty acids, but carbs are not necessary. So I'm just saying devil's advocate.
Okay, absolutely. So for women, we're now seeing the research shows that we perform best. And we talked about this. So again, it's short term and it's also longevity. If I ask, I would rather be exercising until I'm 80 than do my PB in the next year and then not be burnt out and not be able to exercise as I get older. So it comes back to, okay, take the long-term view. For males, you could argue that they could go on a lower carb diet for longer. But devil's advocate back in here is, we now know that cell for cell, we are more bacteria than we are human cells. And our gut bacteria, what do they thrive on? Complex carbohydrates and fiber. And we know that people, even who are following like a paleo diet or a ketogenic diet, who are just getting their carbs, because carbs are found in fruit and vegetables, have a lower diversity than people who are still including starchy carbohydrates in the form of whole grains. So if I'm now bringing in not just sporting performance, but longevity and overall health, it comes back to the fact that it's about balance. Yes, you can do, if you're a male, keto, low carb for a period of time to be super focused on what you want the outcome. But if we're looking at perhaps maybe when you're off season, or perhaps when you're recovering, that you're bringing back some of that balance because you're thinking about long-term health. Because I'm worried that, like you said at the very beginning, my mum passed away and she ended up having dementia. I know firsthand that that's not something that I want to go. I might have the genes, but I want to make sure that my gut bacteria, which are the guys that are going to be switching on and switching off where the genes are activated, I'm going to keep them happy. And we know from the science that keeping them happy means a diverse diet that contains enough fiber, and that contains enough fiber from your phytonutrients, fruit and vegetables, a rainbow, but also from whole grains. And that might mean from beans and lentils, but it also still means that I'm trying to be getting some in there from like red rice or something like that. I don't have to have gluten. I don't have to have bread because that's inflammatory. We seem to know that from the evidence, but I'm still going to be including in some whole grains.
Yeah, I think that's great to note that. I think it's looking at that you are fueling for your intensity and recovery and repair for today and your future self. And I think that we tend to get narrow-minded and listen to think about what you hear on social media and read, that we forget they're not talking to the endurance athlete. And it's going to be different if it's a CrossFit athlete or, someone that's just doing easy walking, and then someone that's metabolically damaged. So I think what I'm trying to clarify, what about for the endurance athlete, how should we fuel train to perform our best in life and our sport? But going back to something you said, I was going to say heart rate variability. Do you track that to see if you're met with biometrics with clients to see if they're doing too little eating or too much of the wrong food?
Exactly. More and more we're using heart rate variability because that's all about then coming back to baseline. Which nervous system are you activating more? Are you activating the parasympathetic or synthetic? Because we know that which one you are activating more has a response on how I'm going to adapt. So I could be doing everything right, but activating the wrong nervous system. I don't have the environment to then make those adaptations happen, So I think it comes back to, I think we're always looking for quick fixes, but they aren't there. We're always looking for magic bullets, but we aren't there. It's fundamental, following the principles and making sure you don't forget any of the other core pillars. I think for me, that's important. And also that you're using this feedback. So you're using things like heart rate variability, but you're also using things like intuition. And I think it's like, okay, well, how do I feel today? And it's obviously, check in with yourself and trust yourself more. We have so many different devices telling us this is what our numbers are. Sometimes we perhaps even forget to check in with our intuition of how we are absolutely feeling.
Yeah, I call that intuitive fueling, intuitive training, that you actually, if you are hungry, eat. Exactly. Like, listen to your body. We forgot about it.
Totally. And and I'm huge because in performance sport we're all about measuring numbers and things like that. So I'm very much into knowing your numbers. Because your numbers can also help gauge, okay, well, how was that training session? How do I need to recover now, etc. Do I give myself more carbohydrate this evening or not? But at the same time, bring in that intuitive eating in there, absolutely. And also remember, a lot of these tools using algorithms. And again, I am a mixed race woman. A lot of the algorithms are for Caucasian, males. So is that heart rate variability, or is that number exactly what me as a mixed race woman? Probably not, so it gives me an estimation, but it's not a solid number that I'm completely going to be like, I need to replace 279 calories. It's not that much of an accurate science. It is a guide. It helps me start thinking about what I should be doing, but it's not super, that accurate.
Yeah, true. So going to protein, I've been really fascinated about protein and Dr. Gabrielle Lyon the past year. And then yesterday I was listening to this podcast on amino acids, essential aminos versus branched chain amino acids, and getting our protein in
Mm.
Ideal body weight and is what Dr. Gabrielle Lyon's research shows, that as we get older, especially getting your ideal body weight in grams of protein per day,
Mm.
spreading that 30, 50 grams out every 4 hours. But
Mm.
if you are doing what even today I forget to eat because I'm, worked out and I showered and I'm doing this call, that it's like, oh yeah, I have to eat. So it's, how do you get that protein in and get enough calories, like going back to the low energy availability, that I think it's so easy when you are fat adapted to forget to eat, that you have to get your protein in. And I was doing
Totally.
for a while OMAD, which I didn't know was OMAD at the time, but I would wait till eat till I got home and really just have coffee with whatever fat in it and collagen. That I think a lot of people do that. They get into the OMAD and maybe 2 meals a day. But if you're working on getting, going back to your purpose, your why, and if I want to get stronger and
Yeah.
faster as an athlete and perform my best in life and sports, that I really am now focusing on how am I going to get 30, 50 grams of protein in 3 times a day or every 4 hours, get that in my eating window. And if I do a 12 to 15 hour fast, not do 16, 18-hour fast because I can't get my protein in, and if I fast longer and blah, blah, blah. So that's what I think is, get this like puzzle for
It's
people listening.
tricky.
Come to me
Super
like, okay, how
tricky.
am I supposed to do fasting and get my protein and do my
Yeah.
exercise and work on
Yeah.
performance?
Yeah, and I would say this goes back to, okay, so firstly, okay, so getting your protein numbers is huge, especially when you are doing fasting, because your window of eating is much shorter. So making sure that you do that is important. So perhaps then, if you're finding that you're not getting it in the one day, maybe the next day could be a meal where you open up the window so you get your protein, so that you're not constantly in a low protein environment, because otherwise, what's the point? You're doing the training, but you're going to be chipping away at your muscle mass. And then the other thing, and I was talking to a client about this as well, is that nutrition is a journey. So it could be initially, with your coffee, you have a protein shake or a protein bar, which is easier, more convenient. But am I going to be wanting you to rely on convenient protein intake like that all the time? Probably not, because very similarly, like I said before, whole food is the way forward for kind of gut health, minimizes all the different additives. Even things like protein bars, are going to be things, they're going to contain additives and emulsifiers and things like that are not necessarily good for gut bacteria if they're eaten too often. So I'm going to then want you to start developing ways of, okay, make that an apple with a handful of nuts, or an apple with some nut butter, or perhaps some Greek yogurt, or some kefir with some oats or something like that. So start making you go for more food choices as you go along. So I think it's the awareness is key. Firstly, maybe just finding some easy, quick protein ways to get the protein in. I always laugh because I train in the morning and then come into university and I'm eating a boiled egg. And my Italian colleagues, I mean, breakfast here is coffee and biscotti, and there's no way of changing that. It's like, oh, how can you be eating an egg? But I'm like, I did exercise, I need to get my protein in. I need 20 grams, and that's going to be 3 egg whites. So I'm eating my hard-boiled egg. So it's again a little bit of saying, okay, I have 3 protein options that I use that are my go-to after I exercise. So it could be egg combo, one could be a protein shake combo, and one could be kind of nuts with, I would have I'm okay with gluten, so I eat some whole grain bread, seeded or sourdough bread with some nut butter on it, and I know with the quantities that I'm eating enough. So I would say athletes, have at least 2 go-to choices that work for you, that are easy, and then start implementing and using that, and prepare ahead of time so you've got that, so you can kind of just tap into it.
Yeah, those are great tips. I know I forget that when, like today, I'm working at the big club at my gym and in the offices here until I go swimming at lunchtime. So it's like, oh wait, I got to prepare because I just lifted at 5:30, did a 45-minute run, and then I need to figure out like, oh yeah, food. So you have to plan ahead, and it's just like I plan my work bag and my workout bag and my outfit for tonight, and oh yeah, food needs to come in there because or else I'm not a packaged food person, but it's easy to grab a bar and
So what
there's
do
not many
you,
good
so now
quality.
that you're more aware of it, what do you think would work for you in terms of protein?
Well, I like hard-boiled eggs are really easy. I like Paleo Valley. the company, I don't think you get it over there, but you can order fermented beef sticks, which I finished. So I would bring those to me because they're with me
Nice.
because they're
So
easy.
I must just add in, Debbie, I grew up in Southern Africa and we have something. So you guys have
The
jerky and we have
biltong. You have the
biltong.
biltong. That, yeah,
So, oh my
biltong.
God, it
That's
is
the
heaven. So for
best.
example, that would be for me, but obviously the culturally that works for me because I love it. So when I have biltong, totally biltong is one of my go-tos.
Yeah, we have that here, and actually discovered that a year ago. There's this food show, Natural Expo. It's called Expo West, and I researched best sources of protein and good quality without the sugar and all the stuff added. And that was the only one. And it's like 30 grams of protein. So that's kind of my go-to, or the Paleo Valley B sticks. Those two are what I grab. And then I have little packets to put of collagen protein MCT oil I can put in my coffee and a drink. But, even I want to do a podcast one day of the protein, I'll air quotes, protein drinks at the cafes, at clubs and little shops that they're filled with sugar. That,
Oh my
they're not
goodness.
protein. There's like 200 grams of carbs in there, the way they make them.
Totally. I was got a client in the States also, and he's traveling around, and he's going on show soon. He's touring soon. He's a musician. I'm trying to get him in shape for that, and because I kind of look after high performing individuals and also sporting individuals. And so I was looking on Uber Eats for, okay, what is recovery shake and stuff good? Oh my goodness, Nashville, nothing. No. It's like all the protein shakes have apple juice, are loaded with lots of fruit, and it's really impossible, as you say, to find it. And actually, if you're just looking for protein, maybe some almond milk or something like that, or it's very hard. Or just berries, very, very hard.
You have to bring your own shaker bottle with your stuff in it, and then find just water, throw it in there. But
well, I must then say, in the UK, we're better with that, because I could walk into most healthier places and ask and personalize my drink to kind of have what I need. Sorry, we have gone off track.
I know. So side note, everyone. So I have a question too. I wrote down here, metabolic flexibility is something we always talk about, and people talk about to be fat adapted, but still have the, be able to metabolize fat. But I think a lot of people get stuck in just being low carb all the time and have that keto flex that we're still able to metabolize carbohydrates. So have you dove into that research at all, that, if you're prove fat and you like signs and symptoms? Because I have a lot of people, I think I was going to research this, if you've lost that ability to metabolize carbohydrates, when are you too fat adapted and not switching back and forth?
And I think, we have a problem in the West, in inverted commas, because we're extreme. So we eat, public health wise, we're relying far too much on refined carbohydrate, right? Yet at the same time, when we become obsessive with something, we go completely the opposite way and go so low carb. There's no middle ground. So because of that, what's happened is, because we have such a high refined carbohydrate environment, is that most of us are carbohydrate burners. We're not fat adapted because we've just got so much available carbohydrates around. So I think there definitely is something there that we need to lower our carbohydrate intake on a kind of public health level, but looking at the quality of the carbohydrates, the more complex carbohydrate versus refined carbohydrates. But at the same time, if you go too low carb for too long, again, you become metabolically inflexible in the other way, in terms of when you then go and eat a sweet potato, which, is super nutritious, that can increase, because your body just like, give me those nutrients and I'm going to hold on to that kind of carbohydrate. We go the opposite way. So we become fat making machines quicker in terms of carbohydrate intake, so this is what goes back exactly to my idea of balance. So not extreme with a refined carbohydrate, but not always on a chronically low carbohydrate diet, finding that middle ground. And again, looking at it in terms of, what are my events? What is my training program? How am I periodizing? And how does my diet fit into that? So I will probably say, never stay too much in a low carbohydrate environment. Allow yourself some complex carbohydrates now and again, based on what your goals are and when you're training, etc. And again, absolutely, public health messages is that we're eating too much refined carbohydrates and too much sugar. So, reining that in. It's not all or nothing. It's that sweet spot. And that sweet spot, I think, is what's hard to find.
It is. That's that Goldilocks effect. And I think our industry goes like one end to the spectrum to the other. It's like,
Totally.
okay, eat all fat. All right, now everyone eat only protein. And then,
And
the
that's why it's so
carbs get
confusing.
lost.
Totally,
Yes.
totally, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's that's why I really love individualized coaching, that we have to personalize it for that person. I run GI map or Genova diagnostic test to look at what is your gut looking like. It's like, do that twice a year. If you want to do one lab test, do your gut test. It's
Great.
fascinating. And then the
Yeah.
Dutch hormone panel, blood chemistry, and looking at all that together to really collect clues on how to create a program
Put it
for
in for
an
you.
athlete. Yeah, it's
Exactly.
amazing what you get, because a lot of people have poor digestion. Like, they're eating this certain way, but like you said, they're not feeding their microbiome the right foods, and then they can't
Yeah.
even break their food down, or they have poor, like I have people that have eating ton of fat, but they're not even digesting it. So then they're actually low in fat soluble vitamins. So people need to really
Oh.
look at the whole picture of what you're doing to yourself. But do you do any lab testing with clients, or how
I
do you
do,
figure out
and
what to
again,
eat?
even with my lab testing, it's very personalized from client to client. So I, like if I have a client who is a female, we're definitely doing some hormonal testing. If they have problems in terms of digestion, then perhaps I would bring my gut testing in here. But also at the same time, is whilst I'd love to collect all this information from you, I'm a performance nutritionist. That's what we do with all our athletes. We get all this information, then I can kind of write a really bespoke plan or really do some bespoke education. But at the same time, these tests cost a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
I tend to find for some clients that I see in clinic is just by making some simple basic choices around balance and whole foods and cleaning things up, even without doing some of the testing, I'm getting
Yeah.
some of the changes. So again,
Yeah.
I move across that journey. Let's maybe start with the basics. Do we need to do lab testing? And do you have the budget for that? Fantastic. Let's do
Yes.
it. Let's learn
True.
more. But if not, then, it's okay. Get the basic pillars right, and then we can kind of build on that, you know?
Yeah. That's what I do with clients. It's like, okay, let's just work on your nutrition no matter what first, and look at your sleep hygiene routine, look at your stress management program and your, movement throughout the day. But if you don't get your sleep, you're not managing your stress, and you're not eating real food, then, you
Exactly.
know, it doesn't matter if you do tests or supplements at all. So last bit, if you are an athlete trying to lose weight versus just longevity gains versus performance, do you have different protocols or suggestions for those people that just, I want to lose 10 pounds versus longevity versus I want to get faster this year?
Totally, totally. And it comes back to like what I would do is we're working in different phases. So I would say phase one might be the fat loss. And again, depending on whether you're a woman or a man, I might do that slightly different. If I'm working with men, that could, for me, fundamentally, because I'm a dietitian, I want behavior change. And I want you to actually know what healthy, balanced eating is. Now, what we know with fat loss is there's 100 and different ways to lose weight. The key for me is something that works well for you, that you feel well with. So I might do healthy, balanced eating with portion control reduction. That might look like more keto, and we measure ketone, with keto sticks. That might look more paleo. That might look like intermittent fasting. That varies from client to client. And again, always getting the feedback, making sure I'm matching it up with their training program. But then, we then talk about once they hit their body composition numbers, we then start saying, right, it's now about performance. What does performance mean? It means fueling in a well-fueled state. What does that actually look like? And then once we're there, then I'm kind of like, okay, well, what does longevity look like? Are we feeding the gut bacteria right? And what does that look like? And how do I move you on to that? And then
Yeah.
the enjoyment factor. I mean, food is also to be enjoyed. Yes, we are when we're
Especially in
athletes,
Italy.
particularly in Italy, and I learned that here. What's so funny is, I'll tell you a story, Debbie, is that my colleagues make me laugh all the time because the other day I brought in my lunch. And I made, again, looking at my protein, making sure that I had my protein, but I didn't have that much in my fridge. And so I had a pasta, but I kind of put tofu in my pasta. Now that is like a massive no here. Functionally, nutritionally, I knew I was hitting my numbers. And like, you should have seen my Italian colleagues, they wanted to die. They're like, now, Linia, now we die. We die. How are you doing that?
That's
So
funny.
totally. So for them, it's also about the enjoyment. And that exactly is what it is, So in all of that is, am I creating health? Am I, number one, creating a healthy approach to food? Am I not demonizing one food over another? So, because we don't, like, no food is a good or a bad food. If we eat too much of what is a good food, it becomes a bad food very quickly. So what does a relationship with food look like? And am I nurturing a healthy relationship with food? Am I nurturing healthy also an enjoyment factor in there? Because if there is that enjoyment factor, you're more likely to stick to it as well, And so all of that kind of being thread through this nutrition journey. And again, it's constantly evolving. And the thing is I always say to my clients as well, is what I learned when I was at university 15 years ago is different to what I'm kind of doing. Yeah, the principles are more or less the same, but nutrition is a fast moving and evolving science. So as we learn more, also that nutrition journey moves and evolves. So gut bacteria, microbiome is the big thing at the moment. And we're learning more about it. And personalized nutrition is the direction that we are going in. And there's lots of different tools that perhaps might give an indication, but we're not 100% there with this is the gold standard way of saying this is how you should eat for you. We're not there yet. We're moving in that direction. And that's why coaches like yourself and myself are able to at least personalize things much more and make it much more bespoke to you. So you can be the super you version of you that you want, whether you're an elite athlete or whether you are just someone wanting to keep healthy, fit, look good, feel good.
Yeah, I always say all those words. That's funny. Feel good, feel your best, look your best, perform your best in life. And I think it's just to thrive every day, just be happy and enjoy life.
Definitely.
And that's what
It's
you
short
learn
and it's
going to Europe.
precious. Exactly.
Like
Exactly.
in Italy, I stopped doing Ironmans and instead started going to Italy every year. It's like, oh, this is how you should be living life.
Totally. It is absolutely la dolce vita. They do it well.
Yeah,
They do
dolce
it well.
vita.
Yeah,
Yeah,
they
so
do it
true.
well, and ironically, they do it well, and it's like it's a moderation, inclusive. They don't stress as much as well, and I think that plays a huge role.
Yeah, my husband wants to live there. We were looking at houses once a few years ago. It's like, okay, how often are we going to go over there?
Yeah, no,
It's a
I'm very
great spot.
lucky, very
Yeah,
lucky.
well, where can people find you? I know you need to get going. It's Friday night. Well, that's a funny side note. Then we'll say your social media. I just want to throw in, it's always cracks us up. We are just talking about this. When we go to Europe, I go to bed at 8 o'clock at night usually, and I get up at 4:35 a.m. And I'm so
Wow.
backwards in Europe because you don't go to dinner until 8
Oh,
o'clock. And
in
so
fact, so tonight my dinner is after you go to bed. Basically, my dinner is at 9 p.m. tonight.
so I also have to stay on, West Coast time zone when I go there to actually be able to go out to dinner because it's like opposites my schedule. So it's funny how they live their life. So anyway, so we can find you at Linia Patel Nutrition
Yeah.
what's your website?
Okay, so my website is linianutrition.com, but on Instagram I'm at Linia Patel Nutrition, and on the Twitter it's Linia Patel, and same on Facebook it's Linia Nutrition.
Do you use all three of those platforms?
Yeah, I probably use all three, but they kind of feed into each other.
Yeah, just like do one and let it
Do
spread
one and it kind
forward.
of spreads, exactly.
I think
But
people
at
have
this
to pick one.
Yeah, I would say the thing is my name, Linia could be a line, but actually you spell it Linia. And if you just search Linia Patel, there's not many people with that name. So I should pop up quite quickly. So it's Linia Nutrition, Linia, Nutrition, or Linia, Linia, Patel.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time today. And we
Pleasure.
wish we were all in Milan with you. And we'll
I
hopefully
would have
everyone
your
reach out.
sunshine though. It's winter. Look at me. I'm in a
Well, I'm wearing
jumper
a sweater and I had a scarf here. It is like 40. It was cold this morning, but yeah, it's not too cold compared to there.
Okay.
We still have sunshine.
We still
So
have a blue
enjoy.
sky.
Yes. So thanks so much for coming on the show and sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.